All right, today we're going to show you a few new features of WebdriverIO, and we're going to look into snapshots. You might have heard of snapshots, maybe when you talk to developers that they use unit test cases with snapshot features. And we're going to explain in this video what you can do with the new snapshot feature of WebdriverIO. There are two types of snapshots that you can use within WebdriverIO. We're going to use that in a simple project that we're going to set up. So let's first start with setting up the project. And when we're done, we're going to look into the two types of snapshots. After that, we're also going to look into what you can do with the snapshots and also see if we can use it for web and also for mobile. To start a new project from scratch, you use the npm init, and then you can install it with WebdriverIO and latest. If you provide a path at the end, then it will be the path where the project will be installed. So let's just start with it by hitting the enter button. It will now install WebdriverIO, the runner itself. Based on that, you will get a few questions. The CLI runner will give you a few questions on how to install the project and which modules you want to use during this project. So for now, it asks us where we want to install it. So we're just going to walk through the questions. We want to install it in the demo folder. And for now, we're going to focus on end-to-end testing, but you also have the option to use this with component testing. We also want to run it on our local machine. And for now, we're going to focus mainly on web, but with the snapshot feature that we're also going to explain in a few minutes, you can even use that on mobile devices, even with mobile web and mobile native applications. Then for now, as mentioned, we're going to focus on the web. Let's use a default browser, which will be Chrome. And we're going to use Mocha together with TypeScript. Then it asks us if we also want to set up our default project. And for now, we want it to create some files for us, which will be located in this folder. And we want to keep it simple, so we don't want to use some page objects today. Here you also have the option to use a reporter, and there are tons of reporters that you can use. For now, we're going to use the spec reporter. These are the packages that you can also use for testing, but for now, we're not going to use any of these extra plugins. We just want to make sure that we can set up the project and run it. One last question here is if we want to use visual testing, and yes, we want to use the visual testing service. And we're going to dive into that in a few minutes. Last but not least, you also have the option, as we already selected the visual one, for other services that WebdriverIO provides. For now, we're going to keep it to the visual one. So let's hit enter, and we want to install all the packages. All right, as you see, we are done now with installing all the packages. So what we now need to do is we need to start our IDE. But to do that, we first need to go to the demo repository that we just created. I've got a alias on my machine to start a visual code here. So now the visual code is started. Just to give you an impression of what has been installed for you, as you already saw, the node modules that we selected, basically the packages that we selected, are installed. We've got everything set up for TypeScript, and we got our basic configuration file here. In our basic configuration file, we already selected the visual service, and here on this specific line, you can see that the visual service has already been added. We will look into that in a few seconds. For now, I'm going to put the logs a little bit lower. I'm going to put it to silent, so I will not have a lot of information in my console, but we will see that in a few seconds. As we mentioned, we're going to look into snapshot testing. And just to give you an example here, this is a very simple website that we're going to look into. It's the Internet Heroku login application. This has already been set up for us, and we're going to run this in a few seconds. For now, we're going to disable a first specific snapshot test because we're going to highlight that in a few seconds. For now, we have this basic test, and in this basic test, we're going to log in, and we're going to wait until you log into a banner is going to be shown. And let me just run this on my machine. For that, I'm going to open the terminal, and I'm going to do npm run WDIO. That's the first script that has automatically been created for us. We can just run it now. with the automation script, and our test succeeded. So as you could already see here, within, 2-3 minutes, the complete project for WebdriverIO has been set up for you with all the installed dependencies and already the visual service that we selected. But as you already saw here is that we have a text that we're going to verify. But with the new snapshot method of WebdriverIO, you have the option not to put the text here in your test file itself, but to store this, to automatically store this and use this in every run that you're going to run with your in your pipeline, for example. You even have the option to take, for example, a DOM snapshot of that specific element. So let's take a look how that works. We will now start with creating a snapshot of the text. Normally, you could do a expectation like this, where you would say the flash would have text, which would be you logged into a secure area. But what if you would have long text, or if you want to check a specific object that you return from the browser, you can use the snapshot for that. And how that works is very simple. We create basically a new expectation and we say expect. In this case, we want to expect that the flash element is there and that we can retrieve the DOM data from that specific element. We can do that by saying to match snapshot, and that's it. If I would now run this specific test case again, then we would see in a few seconds that there is an extra file, a snapshot file, added to our project. That's this specific file. In this file, you can see that it took a complete snapshot of that flash element and stored it in this file. If you're going to use this in your project, you also need to commit these files into your project. Don't forget that, otherwise this feature will not work for you. But in this case, we copied basically everything. It's a really nice feature, but there's one thing that you need to be aware of. If you're going to use the DOM snapshot on this specific element, it basically copies all the attributes. If something is changing in the attributes, then you might have a failure. So the advice would be to, for example, only verify the text. So let's also do that in this specific case for the flash element. So let's say get text. In this case, we would say just compare this and get the text. If I would run this test case again, and we will use the snapshot feature, we would see a failure. And the reason for that is that our snapshot holds the complete DOM structure of that specific element. It has the div element, it has the age element, so it will now fail. You could already see this here in the assertion itself. We expected that it would have all this data, but in the end, we only returned you logged into a secure area with a cross. If this is something that you expected, then on your local machine, you could say, run it again, but now update also the snapshot. You can do that by providing --space --s, and it will automatically update the snapshot. So for now, run it again. And there we would see that the snapshot file itself was updated. And now, if I would run it again and again and again, it will compare that with what you would have in your snapshot file. There's a second thing that I wanted to mention also about the snapshot files. If you implement the snapshot feature a lot in your test cases and you run this and something changed in your application and you have a lot of errors, then you really need to be aware of what you're accepting and updating with the --s feature, the automatic update. Be sure of every change that you're going to accept. Otherwise, you might accept things that are really bugs. So if you're going to use the snapshot feature, you have a lot of advantages of that. But just be aware of the fact that if you have some issues, if you have some bugs or some failures in your expectations, that you really check every expectation that failed before you're going to do the update with the --s to update the snapshot itself. That was the first part about the snapshots. As you already see here, there's a second snapshot here, which is also based on the element, but this is a to match element snapshot. And it also has an extra ID, which is called flash alert. So what does this mean? As you might remember, we started with adding the visual service. Now with the WebdriverIO visual testing service, you have the option to take viewport screenshots, to take, for example, element screenshots, as you can see here. You can even create full page screenshots, and you can even create tabbable full page screenshots. And what it is something that we're going to show you in a few seconds. For now, we're going to run this code, and then you would see what the visual service can do for you. Again, we're going to run it with npm run WebdriverIO. And in a few seconds, when this test case is done, we would see that it took a screenshot of the element. Let's just show it again. We have the snapshot folder here, and what was added in that snapshot folder was the flash. You logged into a secure area. In this case, this is a very small element, but you can also do that, as I mentioned, with, for example, a viewport, the complete viewport of your screen, or you can also do that with the complete page of your website. But now let's take a look at creating a full page screenshot with the visual service. I already prepared a code example for you, so let's just paste that in now. And as you can see here, we have the URL that we're going to load. We're going to load a guinea pig website of WebdriverIO that we use also for testing the visual service. We're going to wait for the page to be loaded. And in this case, we're telling the expectation to take the browser and then to create a full page screenshot. That full page screenshot has a few arguments that you need to provide. The first one is the ID. How do you want the screenshot to be called? Secondly, we can also provide some options. I'm first going to disable this one, but I'm going to explain you later on what that one exactly does. And we're also going to hide an element. This is an element. Sometimes you might have, for example, a menu that if you scroll that it sticks to the top, and especially when we're creating a full page screenshot, you need to disable that element after the first scroll. Otherwise, that menu will be there on every scroll and every stitch that we're going to do. So by providing the element that is the menu, it will automatically hide that after the first scroll. So let's run this again. We'll now load the website. It will take the first screenshot. The navigation will be hidden. It will create multiple screenshots now. We'll stitch it together. And in a few seconds, you can already see it here on the screen, you would see that there's a file stored, auto-saved to the baseline. That file can also be found in your snapshots folder. And if we would zoom in a little bit, then you would see that this is a complete snapshot, including the fixed header, menu at the top. And this is the complete page. What will be done now, and especially for the second time that you're going to run this, is that your actual screenshot will be compared with the baseline that you compared here or that you stored here, and it will do that every time. There are a few things that you need to be aware of. One of the things is that if you create a snapshot or a baseline image on, for example, your local Mac, and you want to run this in, for example, your GitHub Actions pipeline, then you cannot use that specific baseline image that you created on your Mac. You need to compare, as we call it, apples with apples and not apples with Androids. You need to compare an image that has been created on a machine. You need to compare it all the time because there's a difference in how data is shown in a screen on, for example, a Mac in comparison to a Linux machine. Or there's even a difference when we are going to compare Chrome to Firefox. So every configuration, OS and browser, and even browser version and OS version, needs to have its own baseline, its own specific baseline image. So also be aware of that. You can only compare what you created on the machine that you're going to run it on. Having said that, we have that specific baseline image now. And let me zoom in a little bit more, because as you can see here, we also have a lot of text. There are some challenges also with websites, and especially with, for example, font rendering in different browsers. And 9 out of 10 times when there is a specific issue with, for example, the comparison that it didn't compare how it should, The 9 or 10 times that might be based on, for example, the fonts, that the fonts were not loaded properly, or that a specific thing moved in the font, meaning that it moved a pixel. And because the comparison will be done by pixel based, it is done as a pixel by pixel based comparison. It might sometimes also be easier to only focus on the layout. So not on the text, but only on the layout itself, on the colors, how everything is structured on the page. And as I mentioned, I wanted to get back to also enable layout testing. Let me now enable this one. And hopefully, if we would run this again, you would see already what the difference is between running it in layout mode and running it with the default mode. So we're going to load the page again. And as you can see, there's no text here. So we're now only going to focus on the layout of the page. This would prevent also flakiness, especially with fonts. But as you can also see now, is that there is an error. There's a mismatch between what we created as a baseline image in comparison to what we took. In this case, we have a mismatch percentage of 2.8%. It looks like a very small percentage, but in this case, the original baseline image has the text, but in the actual folder, we would see that the full page screenshot has no text at all. So this is the advantage of the enable layout mode. You can leave out the text, but then be aware of the fact that if you created a screenshot with text enabled, it will fail now. If you want to store this as a new baseline image, you just need to drag this, for example, to the new folder, and you need to override it. So as you can see here now, rerunning this session again with the enable layout testing enabled, created a new screenshot, and that screenshot was compared with the baseline without that text, and it was successful. But as mentioned at the beginning, we already have the option to use component testing for visual, but we can also use it for mobile. So how do we do that? Let's use the Appium boilerplate that also WebdriverIO provides. Let's move to this screen. So here we have the WebdriverIO Appium boilerplate. And if you want to know more about how to use this, you can just go to the GitHub link, which will also be posted here. But if we now want to run the visual service also with the Appium boilerplate, we first need to install it. We can do that by doing npm -d, meaning we want to have it as a dev dependency. And then we say the visual service. It will now be installed in this project. And because we're using a TypeScript project, the only thing that we then need to do in the TypeScript project is to add the visual service. We can do that by saying add WDIO and then say the visual service. And now also TypeScript should recognize all the types that we're going to use. The last thing that we need to do here is to add also the visual service to this boilerplate. We can do that by saying services, and in the services, we just need to say visual. And now we should be able to use the visual service for mobile devices. I have an emulator already running on my machine, as you can see here on the left. So let's start with running a test case. Basically, this specific test case where we're going to try to log in again on the Heroku page. But let's also create now that specific snapshot of that flash element. So let's again say await, then say expect. And then in this case, it will be form page.flash. Typing sometimes is really hard. And then let's say to match element snapshot. As we mentioned, we already added the types. We now also have this specific element or this specific matcher added. And I just need to provide this specific ID that I want to give that element that is being stored as an image. So now let's run a specific test case, this specific test case with the visual service. We can do that by running this with the Appium boilerplate, by selecting Android browser and then running this browser.form spec. I already have Appium running in the background. So what it will now do, it will install the package, it will open Chrome, and it will load the URL and enter the data and create the screenshot. As you can already see, a snapshot folder has been created again, and this is the ID that we had. It created this snapshot with Chrome. But as you can see also now here is that we have an annoying fork me label on top of this screenshot. If we want to remove this, we need to know exactly what the locator is of this specific element. In this case, if we want to remove this element, this has a specific selector, we can provide extra options. In this case, we can say hide element. And in this case, we need to provide an array of elements. We can provide an array of elements, so you can hide multiple elements. In this case, what I just want to do is I want to hide the banner, and that banner has the old text fork me on GitHub. If I would now run the test case again on the mobile device with the visual service, we would have a failing test case because the baseline has the banner and the new image does not have the banner. As you can see, the baseline has the banner. The actual screenshot has been taken, has been stored in the temp folder. And as you can see, also the banner itself is gone now. So now you can also use this with browsers. You can even do that with Safari on, for example, simulators or even on real devices. But there's a new feature also in the visual service, which is also the support for native applications. You can now use the same module. You don't need to do anything extra and use this for mobile native application. And it doesn't matter if we talk about Android or iOS. You can use basically the same commands and the service will automatically determine for you if it's running on a native application or if it's running on a web application on your mobile device. In that case, we have another test. That test will use the demo app of WebdriverIO, which you can see here. And what we want to do is we want to create a screenshot of the switch. And we are going to do that in this specific spec file, where we're going to create a snapshot of, let's say, the await expect, and then use the form screen and use the switch. Then we want to say to match element snapshot. In this case, this will be the active switch. And we want to do this again also after disabling the switch again and call this the inactive switch. Now let's run this on the native application. We can do that with the Android app command and now focus only on this specific file, which will be the app forms spec file. So let's run it and it will now start the application again. It will execute the action to tap on the switch, to disable the switch again. And it should now store an active switch, which is basically this one. And it stored also an inactive switch. As we've shown you, you can now also use the visual service for desktop web, for mobile web, but also for mobile native applications. So in the end, if we summarize this, you have two new snapshot methods. The first snapshot method is basically to take a DOM snapshot or an object or text snapshot and store that data in a snapshot file. That would make it way easier for you to do comparisons. And the second snapshot method is to create visual snapshots of your desktop web, mobile web, or native app application. If you want to know more also about how to use the service, you can also go to the WebdriverIO documentation page. And there you would find more information on visual testing. If you want to know more also about the matchers, to match snapshot or the element snapshot or the full page or the tabbable page, you can go also to the Expect API and find more information there. We hope you like the new features. And if you have any questions about this, feel free to find us and ask us questions on the Discord channel, or if you find a bug, feel free to also create that bug on the WebdriverIO GitHub pages. Thank you.